So I believe that we are closer to God when we are asking questions than when we think we have the answers. I believe we're closer to God when we're asking questions than when we think we have the answers. So I'm going to ask a few questions. And in the interest of full disclosure, I will tell you that these questions are pretty leading questions, but they're questions nonetheless. The first question, I have three to start. The first question, and you can look at your Celebrate and sort of cheat on this one a little bit if you need to. It's from the first verse of this morning's gospel reading. The people in this story end up in the middle of a big storm at sea. Whose fault is it that they end up there? Who directed them into this storm? The first verse in this gospel lesson tells us that. That's the first question. Who directed this group into the storm? Who did it? Whose fault is it? It's Jesus' fault himself. Jesus himself took these folks and said, let's go this direction. He deliberately took them into this storm. This past week, as you know, storms have been all over the place, right? Your cell phone has had all the warnings of all the storms. The church that Kate works at, the church that we went on the mission trip with, is in Uniontown, and they actually had a tornado touchdown that went right through their back parking lot and backyard. That went through Uniontown. It has been a summer of storms, right? And here we have a gospel lesson of Jesus himself not saying run for shelter, not saying go and hide, but he's saying come with me and we're going to go right into the face of all those clouds, and we're going to do it at sea, which seems even riskier. All right, so the second question. The first question was about who directed them into this oncoming storm. The second question is who is with Jesus? Who is it that's in the boat with Jesus? The disciples. The reading for today says they woke him up. It doesn't really tell us completely who the they were, but we know that it's his followers. It's the people who have listened to his story, who have put some faith and some trust into him. And Jesus is putting them in a little boat, and he's taking them out into the storm. You all are people of faith. You all are people who gather here to feel closer to God. It's important to hear that in order for that closeness to happen, sometimes Jesus takes us into the storm and not away from it. So I have one more question to start. And this one I'll give a little bit of background for because it's not in your Celebrate, all right? The room that we're in right now is called the sanctuary. It's called a sanctuary of a church. This particular room is the sanctuary. So if I said, go get something out of the sanctuary, you would know where to go. But within the sanctuary, there are parts and pieces. People who go to seminary and pay all that money know all these cool words, and I'm going to get to teach some of them to you. This is all the sanctuary, but there's parts and pieces in here. This raised part is called, do you know what that's called? That's the chancel. And our church doesn't really have this, but if you go into especially like an older Gothic church, you could see this part of the church. I'll kind of call this aisle way up front this. Churches have something called a transept. Which is sort of a cross aisle that's supposed to sort of make the shape of a cross. It's supposed to sort of reach out in the front of the sanctuary and cross the front of the sanctuary, and it's called a transept. We don't really have one, but I'll call this front area one that I'm in right now. So we have other parts and pieces here, sound room, stairs, balcony, all that. But where people sit has a particular name. Do you know the name of the section of the sanctuary where people sit? Do you know the old name for that? It is. It's called the nave. N-A-V-E. Nave. So my question is, do you hear in that word nave, N-A-V-E, a word similar to any other word that we use? Anything like that? Like let's say, for example, N-A-V-E, we were to knock the E off the back and make it a Y. Does that sound like anything? Navy, naval. If you go into old cathedrals, they actually build the church to look like you're in the inside of a boat. They build it to look like a upside-down church, the church to look like an upside-down boat, so that when you look up, you feel like you're in the boat. The place where you sit is called a nave, and it's the root, same exact root of navy and naval and all of that stuff. You're in a boat. There is a paramount up front on the high altar that has a boat on it, because this is a symbol for the church. That as followers of Jesus, we're called to get into the boat. We're called into this place. And the scariest part of it is, Jesus himself doesn't just tell us to run for shelter once we're into this boat. Where does Jesus take us? Right into the very storm itself. What storms are you facing? Better yet, what storms are we facing together? What storms are out there? What fear do we have that it's time for us as a congregation to look at and to know that Jesus sometimes directs us right into the face of that storm and right into the face of that fear? On June 9th, Lisa, do you remember where we were at June 9th at let's say 11:30 at night? Do you remember where we were on June 9th at 11:30 at night?
I guess we were in the Victory Social Services.
Okay, maybe I have the time a little wrong. At some point on June 9th, we stopped at a Valero gas station. Maybe 11:30 is too late, somewhere around that time. We were at a Valero gas station. There were Lisa and I and about, 8 kids or so. And we stopped in Vinton County in a place that I won't deny at all sort of gave me the creeps. There was a car in the parking lot that had KKK painted all over it, and I came to find out it had lots of Ks, not just 3. But because I was so sort of freaked out, it had these 3 Ks on it, which sort of creeped me out. When we walked in, the inside of this gas station, we were just there to buy ice. The inside of this gas station had an open kitchen, which I've never seen in a gas station before. And there were about a dozen, maybe half a dozen people standing around who got dead silent when we walked in. We were the only people with sleeves on our shirt. I think some of, they were kind of scary, local, and it made me feel a little uneasy. It's amazing how Jesus gathers us and takes us sometimes not away from the storm, but right into the face of it. You know the news this past week. You know that a boy actually named Dylan, who, by the way, is a confirmed Lutheran boy, hasn't been in church a lot, but is part of a Lutheran congregation, went to a Bible study in a church in Charleston. He was there for a little while, and he shot and killed 9 people while he was in there. You've heard the news, right? One of the people that he shot and killed was somebody who actually went to Lutheran seminary and is known by people that I know. And so here's a person who's been a member of a Lutheran church and who ends up shooting somebody amongst other people who is a Lutheran-trained pastor. Now, I could make all sorts of discussion about how we should be thinking about gun control. I could do all that sort of stuff, but that's not really, I think, the message from that. I think the message from that is, as people who ourselves know that racism and issues like that still exist, as people ourselves who own handguns or rifles and who think about responsible use of those, how could we enter into the storm of this? How could we as a congregation, as part of the nave, called together, know that we're not supposed to run away from the storm that's all around us, but that Jesus takes us right into it? Why does Jesus do that, by the way? Why does Jesus call us to this place, give you the energy to get out of bed, to drive here, and bring you to this place, and then when you're here, ask you to go right into the storm. Why does Jesus do that? Why in the world would that be what we're called to? Something happens in the storm. When this boat full of people get out there, they find out that they're in over their heads a little bit, right? They find out that their own powers, their own abilities, their own efforts to do things are kind of going to be meaningless. This storm is above them. There's only one place where they can fully put their faith and for have this come out as it should. Because the Jesus who steers us into the storm is right there too. And the other part of the story is that Jesus shows full mastery over these storms. That it's not just like he says, oh boy, I directed you out here and now I don't know what to do. But that Jesus himself is able to calm these storms. So I hear a lot, and there's a very recent Pew study out that says this again. I hear time and time again, and this Pew study says this again, that the church, especially mainline churches, especially Lutheran churches, are filled with people who are confirmed and don't go to church anymore. Not filled, I guess, unfilled with people would be the better way of saying that. That we're dying is what I hear time and time again. That we're not doing well, that we're losing people. How do you feel? Is that true? Questions bring us closer to God than answers. Is that true? Is this true of us? I'm kind of inclined to believe not that we're dying. I don't think that's completely true. Because dying is something that's sort of passive. It's something that you just sit back and wait for it to happen to you. I don't think that we're dying, per se. In truth, I think we're failing. I think there's a difference between dying and failing. I think failing is a little bit more active than passive. And here's what I think we're failing at. St. Michael's, the Lutheran Church, mainline churches as a whole, I think we're failing at the idea of being in God's Navy. I think we're failing at the idea that we are supposed to be steered not away from the storms of life, but towards them. What storms are we facing together? What are we trying to accomplish, right? There's the storm of the festival, right? There's all of that and that changing and that being different and that being a tradition versus something different. That's a storm. Will we face that together? Will we see Christ himself in the facing of that? We live in a world where people walk into a church and shoot people in a Bible study. That's a storm we could easily face together. We have kids who I think the hope is not just to end with the trip that we've just been on, but to go on more trips, even better and further and farther trips. Maybe these can be storms that we face together. Because at the end of the day, the reason why we gather here is to be closer to God. At the end of the day, the reason why we come here is because we want to feel Jesus' presence in our lives. But if we're not with Jesus in the boat, if we're not going into that storm, how will we feel that calming presence that calms the storm? How will we know him? And so my question is, what is our storm? What is it that we are in the nave together, going into the face of? So I brought this thing. It's been a while since I've used it. It'll take me a minute to get this out. It's been a while since I've used it. I don't even know how well it's going to come out of here. Let's see what I have here. It's really kind of wrinkled up and stuck. Okay. Let's see if I can get this thing on right. Armhole somewhere. Okay, so I brought this thing. Ask me why I need this. Why do I need a poncho? Well, because it's Ohio and it rains every day. I need a poncho for that. But I also need a poncho because Jesus is steering us. not into a place of safety or shelter, but right into the storm. Jesus is steering us directly into his caring hands. And the question is, will we go? We can even make up St. Michael's ponchos. We can all wear them together. I'll keep mine because I'll need it for the rest of the day. But the question is, will we together go to where Jesus cares for us and keeps us? Will we go into the storm? Amen.